Hello, everybody. It's Jane Rachel, and I am here with someone that I am honored to call a friend, Jessica Minhas. She is an extraordinary advocate for both survivors of sexual assault and human trafficking, and she's also started her own nonprofit called I'll Go First. But in the last few years, in addition to being a tireless advocate, she's also been dealing with her own health issues, including an autoimmune brain disease. Jessica, first of all, thank you so much for being here. And if you don't mind, if you could just go back a few years and tell us what your first symptoms were like and what it took and how you got a diagnosis.
Gosh, my first symptoms. So I'm diagnosed with Hashimoto encephalopathy, otherwise known as steroid-responsive encephalopathy autoimmune thyroiditis, I think.
Wow, those are big words.
Those are big words. I think that's how you say it. I'm not sure. There's a lot of controversy with my diagnosis because Hashimoto is often considered you automatically think of the autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's disease, but actually it's not related at all. It just shares the same antibody, which is the thyroid peroxidase antibody, which is a marker for inflammation in the brain. But your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone numbers are level, which is why a lot of people don't get diagnosed. A lot of doctors are like, this doesn't make any sense, bye. But I always recommend going to a teaching hospital.
Yes. Yes. And I don't want to take away from your interview, but just that point, I have myasthenia gravis. Same thing for years. I had the exact same antibodies and they kept getting higher and higher and higher. And every doctor was like, your TSH is normal, so they don't mean anything. And I'm like, how can these, be growing each test and it mean nothing? So it's interesting because I think those same antibodies are involved in both the same autoimmune disease.
They are. Yeah. As I understand it, myasthenia gravis is more of a neuromuscular disease and affects the central nervous system. I'm learning all this right now. And whereas mine affects more of just the brain, the other nervous system. I should be better at this by now.
No, you're great. So so what were the first symptoms? Like, how did you know something was wrong?
I didn't know something was wrong, except that I just felt more and more incompetent. I couldn't stay organized. My husband was helping me when I first started my nonprofit. My husband was helping me organize all of the to-do lists and what happens next. And I just remember staring at him and being like, I couldn't even understand what he was saying. It was like a foreign language. I was hearing the words, but like nothing made sense. It was like it was like a fire hydrant of letters. And I was like completely lost with where to put everything. And I happened to be an affiliate program with Harvard Medical School. And so I was studying trauma and the neuropsychology of trauma. So I just got so lucky because I was already studying the diagnostics of how trauma is manifested by observational symptomology. So you've probably heard that a kid who has trauma at home, they might come to school and we might think initially that they have ADHD or ADD, but what's really happening is the brain is just overloaded from disorganization from the toxic stress that they're constantly exposed to at home. So I started fitting the criteria of ADD and I was like, oh my goodness, there are cases of adults who are diagnosed with ADD later in life. And that is hugely beneficial for people because it's like, oh, this makes sense finally. I don't feel incompetent. Really, there's a real biological reason that this is happening. But since I really fit the criteria, I think I just so happened across the study. I need to go back and look at this, but I think I just so happened across a study that showed that temporal lobe epilepsy can look like ADD. And so because I had like run across that somewhere, when I went to a psychiatrist, because I was like desperate to get my life back together, he was like, well, let's put you on Adderall. And I was like, well, I do remember saying that ADD can be confused with temporal lobe epilepsy. And if you're put on Adderall, it can make your predisposition to any neurological symptoms sometimes more susceptible to expressing themselves. And he was like, no. You should just keep coming back to me. And he had this like little side office in the Upper East Side. And I was like, I don't think so. But that's one of the things with going to a doctor. You really have to learn how to trust your gut, even though you feel like a crazy person. Yep. So then I went, then I fell down the subway stairs. Like I blanked out and I just remember so painfully, just falling down the subway stairs on my tailbone. And when I got to the bottom, people were like, "Oh my gosh, you okay?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, fine." I'm just hobbling towards the train. But I think I was like realizing that that's weird. And my therapist was like, "Well, you probably, since you have a chronic history of trauma, maybe you have dissociative disorder, or you had a flashback or PTSD where you zoned out, and that's probably why." And I was like, "Yeah, but I haven't had this kind of dissociative disorder before, and I've been working on my trauma now for like the last decade." And again, just going back to all the diagnostics I had access to, I was just so fortunate. So I went and saw a neurologist, and the neurologist was like, "You need a sleep study." I'm sure people who are watching this or listening, or even you, Jane, are like, "Ugh, have been here." So the
Yeah.
neurologist was like, "Let's do the sleep study." Of course, nothing happened in the sleep study. She's like, "You're just stressed. Don't
Yes.
worry about it." And I'm like, "What does that even mean?
Yes.
Don't be stressed." I don't know what that means.
I've been told that 20
What does that
million
mean? Can you
times.
give me what does that
Yeah.
mean? I
What
don't
does that mean? Exactly.
understand. Can you give me a 4-point
Yes.
like criteria for what that
Yes.
means?
And when you tell someone not to be stressed, they end up getting more
I
stressed.
know, because I'm stressed about not being stressed in a
Exactly.
way that I can't figure it
So
out.
true.
It
Yep.
seems like such a simple problem to solve. And it wasn't until I finally started having pins and needles only on one side of my body, and I went to my chiropractor, and my chiropractor, who later hit on me, which was inappropriate, but I was um, he shouldn't be working anymore with a license. Anyway, he was like, "You're having like one side pins and needles." So I was like, "Yeah, it's weird. Can you fix it?" And he was like, "No, no, I don't want to touch you. You need to go to a neurologist." And I was like, "But why?" And he's like, "Well, that's a central nervous issue, and that's out of my realm of treatment." And I was like, "Yeah, but I already went to one, and they said that I needed more
But
sleep." He's like, "Well, you need to go find another one."
but it's really good that he did that instead of just saying, "Oh, let me give you an adjustment or something." So
I
you got to
know,
give him some
and that
props
he
for that.
really advocated for me to advocate. So he really gave me the permission as a doctor I needed to be able to say, "Okay, I'm going to go find another doctor because this doesn't make sense." So I think he was like really the turning point for me. And then I just so happened across this book called Brain on Fire, which is written by Susanna Callahan. And in the book, I was at a coffee shop and I just picked it up because it said brain. And I was like, "Oh, I'm studying brains." And in the book, I flipped, I think it's like page 73 or something. And there's this one tiny little line where she talks about her partner, who's now her husband, witnessing her have a temporal lobe seizure. And she is moving her mouth and she's like moving her fingers like this. And I remember thinking, Chris, my husband, was like, "I can tell you're anxious because you move your mouth and you do this thing with your fingers." And I was like, what if I have seizures? That would be crazy. And my cohort were all PhDs and all MDs. So I asked them, and even them who see me as a friend and colleague, which I'm totally flattered, they're so smart. They were like, "It's probably not that." So I reached out to Susanna because I thought it might be seizures, and she was so generous and she connected me with her team at Lenox Hill. So I went and saw one of the doctors on her team, Dr. Chong, because I thought I might have epilepsy. And again, I just got so lucky with my insurance at the time. I didn't need a referral. He fit me in right away. And when I saw him, I was like with the WebMD and was like, "I think I have seizure activity because of this." And he was like, "I think you're right." That's, again, I got such a gift by this doctor who believed me. And so we went in hospital for an EEG, and I got really lucky. On the last day, I had one temporal lobe seizure for like a full week. Nothing happened. Then on the last day, I had one. And it turns out the reason I had seizure activity is the same reason that Susanna has had seizure activity. It's because of
Wow.
this autoimmune issue that has hijacked the blood-brain barrier. So, I mean, it's just like all miraculous because I only reached out to her because of the seizure activity. And it just so turns out that her department is a neuroimmunology department. And that's the reason I had the seizure activity. So in terms of symptoms, I have cognitive dysfunction, which comes whenever it pleases, which makes going to work and feeling confident in your skills a little bit tricky. And memory loss, definitely don't remember the last 3 years of my life.
Oh,
And
that
I
sounds.
just saw someone recently. Yeah, and I just saw someone recently. They were like, "Oh, remember, like we haven't talked in 4 years." And I was like, "I thought it was just a year." And then I, sure enough, went back through text messages and like, "Oh my gosh, it's been like since 2017." So yeah, some memory loss and a bunch of other.
It sounds so scary. And I read that book, Brain on Fire. I loved it. And I was also in contact with Susanna. So it sounds like, I mean, she had to go through lots and lots of doctors not believing her. So it's
Yeah,
amazing that
and
she
there's a
got back to
movie.
you. Oh, yeah. And there's a movie. And it's amazing that, great that she got back to you and got you into the right place. So let's take a break from now for a minute. But we'll be back with Jessica Minhas.